operating in Zimbabwe?
I'm grateful to the Noble Lady, the Minister, for her answer. She will be aware of the deep disquiet amongst people in Zimbabwe at the news that the British Embassy in Harare had facilitated a meeting between the chairman of Lazards International, the Noble Lord Mandelson, and Finance Minister Patrick Chinamasa this year. The Noble Lady, the Minister, will recognise, I'm sure, that the provision of any bailout funds to the ZANU-PF regime in Zimbabwe will only prolong the misery and suffering of the Zimbabwe people. It will inevitably be used to fund the Zimbabwe Armed Forces and the Zimbabwe Republic Police Forces salaries, which are overdue at present. And these are the very organs of state which are currently in violation of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, in defiance of the orders of the High Court of Zimbabwe, and committing gross human rights abuses against the people of Zimbabwe. Will the Minister therefore give an unambiguous statement to this House, and more importantly to the ZANU-PF regime, that we as a people and a government will oppose any further funds to the Zimbabwe government until it has demonstrated a sustained adherence to the Constitution of Zimbabwe and an end to the gross human rights abuses of the people of Zimbabwe?
Well, I thank the Noble Lord for his extensive observation. He does make an important point. There is, of course, very justifiable concerns about Zimbabwe in relation to human rights, in relation to governance, in relation to the political system. And may I reassure him that our government, the British government, persistently and resolutely makes representations to the Zimbabwean government about our concerns, asking that the rule of law be observed and that democratic rights be respected. It's important, I think, to point out to the Noble Lord that we do have an ambassadorial presence in Harare. That is actually very important. It is a necessary conduit in trying to ensure the work that the British government does do, not in funding the Zimbabwean government, but, for example, in providing invaluable help to infrastructure projects by working with implementing partners and NGOs. By doing that, we do need some form of diplomatic conduit. But at the end of the day, as to what other financial institutions choose to do with a foreign government is not really under the control of the British government.
One thing that is clear is that the human rights situation in Zimbabwe is getting worse. And there is a lot that the United Kingdom government can do, particularly in terms of sanctions against individuals, which it currently imposes on the President of Zimbabwe. Could she explain why the Finance Minister, Mr. Chinamasa, has had that embargo removed? Why aren't we exerting more leverage and using the authority that we've got now to restore human rights?
Well, it does make an important point about human rights, and we consider the human rights situation to be stable but fragile, and we will continue to raise concerns, as I've indicated to Lord Oates, about individual cases. We do monitor the situation closely. We're able to do that because of our embassy in Harare, and we regularly call, both bilaterally and in partnership with EU member states, for an end to all abuses and the restoration of internationally accepted human rights standards. In relation to sanctions, can I reassure him that there is an arms embargo against Zimbabwe and active sanctions against President Mugabe and his wife Grace. That extends to travel bans, no financial relations with either of them, and also their assets in the EU are frozen.
My Lords, with the rapidly deteriorating macroeconomic situation in Zimbabwe and the growing social unrest, what can Her Majesty's government do to support much-needed reforms? And more specifically, to what degree is the government of Zimbabwe genuine in its re-engagement with the West? Would the Minister agree that any financial support to Zimbabwe should be tied to radical reforms in the country?
Well, on the general front, in relation to Zimbabwe's indebtedness to the World Bank, the UK is party to that organisation, and we have made clear that the indebtedness must be cleared, but that indebtedness being cleared will not of itself trigger a resumption of relations. We've made clear there has to be progress on the very type of reforms to which I alluded earlier. What we are endeavouring to do is to actually support the people of Zimbabwe who are vulnerable and in a fragile condition. And I referred earlier to some of the support which the British government has been able to provide. We've been able to provide food security for over 1 million people. We've been able to assist hundreds of thousands of children to attend primary school. We've been able to assist with clean water improved sanitation projects, and we've been helping to reduce the maternal mortality ratio. Now, these are all moves that we achieve and progress we make, not by dealing direct with that Zimbabwean government, but by actually using our implementing partners and other agencies to deliver that help to the very people who need that support and who are currently not getting that support from their own government.
When the time comes, but not before that time, will the government encourage the Commonwealth authorities and the Commonwealth Secretariat to consider welcoming Zimbabwe back into the Commonwealth family of nations?
The aspiration of my noble friend is positive, and ultimately there would be a desire to do that, but the Zimbabwean government has to achieve a very great deal before we would be able to enter into a more formal relationship. There is an overdue need for serious fundamental reform. We have to have evidence that the government in Zimbabwe is itself serious about addressing these reforms, and we need to see visible and tangible evidence of that before any further relationship can be contemplated.
That if the British government... My lords, is there not a danger... Sorry?
Can I draw the noble lady's attention to the original point of this question? I myself have benefited from facilitation by our embassies and missions abroad, as many other members of the House of Lords might have. But would she not accept that there was a slight error of judgment on the part of our High Commissioner in Zimbabwe to facilitate a well-known lobbying group carrying out business on behalf of a financial institution with a government that is legendary only for its human rights abuses and its deep financial corruption?
If the noble lady is alluding to the reference to the visit by Lord Mandelson to which Lord Oates referred, I should make clear to my lordships that Lord Mandelson visited Zimbabwe in a personal capacity in February of this year. He'd been in a private engagement in South Africa, and he simply asked the British government if he could be helpful in promoting our government's objectives in Zimbabwe. And given his experience, our government said he could reinforce the case for reform, which I think is what we all want to see. And to that end, the British Embassy in Harare facilitated the meeting, and the meeting was attended by the British Ambassador. It was constructive, and it focused on the need for economic and rule of law reforms. And I think that's precisely the kind of dialogue that is essential if we're going to see any progress made.
Lord Wallace of Salter.
Maybe to ask the question, standing my name in the order paper.
My Lords, the precise timing, terms and means by which we leave the European Union will be determined by the negotiations that follow the triggering of Article 50. We will observe in full all relevant legal and constitutional obligations that apply.
Does the Minister recognise that we are now in some confusion over sovereignty, which we are going to...
We have been watching the House of Lords debate in London on the 8th of September, discussing the Zimbabwean situation and the recent explosive revelations that a former government official, Lord Mandelson, was in some effort to seek to revive and fund the Zimbabwean economy, well, the ZANU-PF economy really, as it has been known and as perhaps it is in reality. And we saw in this particular clip the British government put to task on its role, or what exactly it is up to in its relations with Robert Mugabe's government. And as we could see there, the embassy was somewhat exonerated. The ambassador, the British ambassador, was exonerated for her role because it is said that All that the British Embassy did was to facilitate a meeting after they had been approached by this former government official. And so this was no sanction, no particular instruction directly from London. This is zimeye.com covering this particular parliamentary debate, which has been provided for by the BBC.